Okay, it looks okay. Good evening, guys, or good morning, good night. I don't know wherever you guys are. Good afternoon, maybe. How's everybody doing today?
Doing well, thank you.
Good to hear. All right. Well, I guess they forgot to announce that we were having ground school tonight, so that's no biggie. Um, all right. Let's get into this week. So this is week 4. Um, So let's get started now that everybody's here. So, all right, guys, today's lesson is we're going to be talking about procedures and airport operations. So we're going to be talking a lot about uncontrolled and tower-controlled airports, airport markings and signs, airport lighting, some approach indicators. Right, we got a VASI, surface operations, chart supplements. We're going to talk about fitness for flight, obviously. This is not for the real world, but we'll talk about it anyway. Aeronautical decision making, again, not really necessary, but it's good to know how to do it even for the sim. Collision avoidance and aircraft lighting. So, first section, let's talk about uncontrolled versus tower controlled. When we talk about controlled airports, we're talking about airports that have air traffic control towers. And not every airport is like this, right? So let's talk about, is anybody here maybe name an airport that they know of that has a control tower? Maybe Leonard?
Dulles?
Yeah, Dulles, exactly. So that's a big controlled airport. You also have some smaller controlled airports, and then you also have uncontrolled airports. So when we talk uncontrolled, we talk about the little hillbilly airports that are kind of in the back country, but they're not really uncontrolled. They're not controlled by an air traffic controller, but they are controlled by the pilots at the airport. Um, Now, at any airport, whether uncontrolled or controlled, you're going to operate on the principle of a traffic pattern. And an air traffic controller will basically guide you through that pattern. At an uncontrolled airport, you're going to do it yourself. So at an airport, the traffic pattern has 5 main legs. Let me grab my pointer here. The first leg, which is aligned with the runway, is when you're taking off, and that's your upwind leg. And we call it upwind because usually the runway you're choosing is into the wind. So that way you don't have crosswinds. And we call it upwind because you're going up against the wind. Now, the second leg is when you've turned 90 degrees to the left or right of the runway. That's your crosswind leg. And that's just the second leg. That's typically you're still climbing to the traffic pattern altitude. The downwind leg is the leg that's parallel to the runway but the opposite direction, and we call it downwind because we're going with the wind, and we could say we probably have a tailwind at this point. The fourth leg is the base leg. It's very similar to the crosswind leg, but you're turning back in towards the runway and you're perpendicular to the wind again. And the final fifth leg is the final leg, and that's when you're coming into final to land on the runway again back into the wind. Final and upwind are essentially the same leg. It just determines whether you're landing or taking off is the difference. So, control tower will also direct aircraft taxiing on the surface. So if you're going to a runway, they'll say, "Hey, taxi to runway 33 via Alpha, Sierra, and then Bravo, or Bravo, Bravo 2, Bravo 3, whatever taxiway they'd like you to go there." Um, Airports without air traffic control towers are controlled by the pilots using them, or the term uncontrolled. So, like I said before, airports have that specified traffic pattern in those 5 legs. And they're used to simplify and organize operations, increase the flow, make sure that you have a safe flow of traffic. And these patterns are either to the left of the runway, and we call that left traffic, or to the right of the runway, and we call that right traffic. So, like we said, the first leg is upwind. You can see the wind is flowing, you know, uh, towards you on the runway you're taking off on. So in this case, it looks like runway 35 here. You're taking off 35, and we call it left traffic because the first turn is going to be to the left, and all of the turns are made to the left of the runway. If we're making right traffic in the bottom here, you can see that all the turns are made to the right of runway 35. So we got that upwind, crosswind, downwind, base, and final. Now, when we're entering these patterns, when we're coming away from, when we're going into the airport, the most common entry to the pattern is what we call a 45 to the downwind. So you see they have this entry labeled here, and this entry is about 45 degrees to the middle point of the downwind, which is right around here. And same thing, if it were left traffic, the 45-degree point to the left downwind. And we call it left downwind because we're on a left traffic pattern, and all turns are made to the left of the landing runway. If it were right, all turns are made to the right of the landing runway. And that's like when we say that, right downwind, that would be on the right of the runway. A right base is on the right of the landing runway. Same thing here. A left base is on the left of the landing runway. So, you might be asking, how do we determine whether an airport is left or right traffic? Well, at airports without an operating control tower, pilots of fixed wing and way shift control aircraft, so ultralights, we're not really talking about those, but uh, they must circle the airport to the left by default, right? So the default traffic pattern is to the left. Now, visual indicators, if they're there, could indicate right traffic, but the default, you should always fly left traffic unless indicated otherwise. You can also look in the FAA chart supplement for U.S. airports to see what type of traffic a runway is, and we'll go towards that at the end when we talk about chart supplements. I'll show you where to find that. At a airport that's controlled by a tower, they will tell you whether to fly left traffic or right traffic. So let's talk about those visual indicators really quickly here. Um, so what we have here, this little circle here with legs sticking out of it, we call this a segmented circle. And what this does is this indicates what type of direction of traffic should be flown for a runway. So the way you determine it, right? So let's ignore 2, 2, and 4 here because these runways are closed. They have an X on them, which indicates a closure. So let's focus on runway 3618. This is a north-south runway. Now, I don't know if anybody's familiar with this, but if you look at this segmented circle here, you notice these legs are aligned with this runway, and these legs are aligned with this runway. Now, could anybody here guess what maybe these angled lines are for? Anybody wants to take a guess?
Indicate traffic direction.
That's exactly correct. So, Leonard, let me ask you, if you were taking off runway 36, which way do you think you would turn initially?
Turn to the left.
Exactly, right? So this line here is bent to the left. So that indicates that it's going to be left traffic on the first turn. And for your base turn, it indicates your base turn is going to be to the left of the runway. Now, it won't always be like this. In some cases, it might have this one going to the left here and this one going to the left here. And you might be flying, the opposite direction. Um, but again, it's just important that we look at that. Now, if you look at 422, even though the runway's closed, which way do you think, what kind of traffic do you think you'd be flying on this runway? If you were taking off runway 4.
Right.
Exactly, right? So it's pointed to the right. So that indicates that we're going to be making a right-hand turn. And runway 4 and 22, I'm sorry, 4 is going to be right-hand traffic. But if you were taking off 22, which way would it be?
Left.
Exactly, right? Because this here is indicating a turn to the left. Now, the reason that they want you flying on this side, right? This is the same as it is probably there's some kind of obstacle over here, or noise abatement. It could be, something like that. It really depends for each airport. So, let's talk about some of the airport markings. Now, runway numbers. Does anybody here have a guess of where we get our runway numbers from?
The magnetic heading.
Exactly, right? So we take the closest magnetic heading. Now, when we talk about heading, there's 360 degrees of heading that we can fall under. And north would be 360 or 0 degrees. And runway numbers and letters are determined from the approach direction. So the number is the magnetic heading of the runway rounded to the nearest 10 degrees. And there's an example here. If it was runway 18, or let's say the magnetic direction is 183, you'd result in runway 18. If the magnetic direction is 076, you'd round up to the nearest 10, so it'd be runway 8. And runway letters differentiate between left, right, or center. So if you go to a major airport like JFK, there's runway 4 left and 4 right. So they're both pointing in a magnetic direction of 040, thereabout, and one's to the left or one's to the right. And there's an example down here. You have 3 parallel runways, each pointing in a direction, 9 left, 9 center, and 9 right. Does that kind of make sense to everybody?
Yes.
All right, cool. So, now we're going to talk about differences in beginnings of runways. So, the designated beginning of the runway that's available and suitable for landing is called the threshold. And remember, only suitable for landing. We're talking about landing right now. A threshold that is not at the beginning of a full strength runway pavement is called a displaced threshold. So, again, at major airports, you'll have a beginning prior to the start of the runway with arrows on it, and that's called the displaced threshold. And here's the thing, you can't land on that section with arrows because it's actually not certified to the same weight rating as a landing pavement. So the threshold indicates the start of a landable runway. The displaced threshold indicates sections of runway which can be used for takeoff or taxi. So if you see arrows on the runway here, this is called the displaced threshold. You can taxi onto these and you can take off on these, but you cannot land. If you see a runway like this with no displaced threshold, you can land and take off on these segments. So again, non-landing portion of runways are found here, and these indicate, and this line here indicates the threshold of the runway. So displaced threshold and threshold.
Do
So
they displace thresholds due to obstructions as well?
yes, they can be due to obstructions. Typically, they also are done that way to give an aircraft more takeoff distance. So, a landing traffic might need that obstacle clearance, but they'll be like, hey, we can extend the runway here and give you more takeoff distance. Um, so, yes, obstacles can be a reason for that. Let's talk a little bit about airport markings and signs. So, we won't go into every single one, but let's talk about some of the basics ones. So, we have a little diagram here. We'll talk about A here. This is a runway indication sign. So you'll find this on a taxiway indicating that you're about to enter a runway. B is the approach segment of a runway. So if you had a taxiway that went around the approach area, you would have this sign. And it would tell you, hey, you're not going onto a runway, but you're going to be under the approach segment of this runway, and that you still need clearance to cross. C is what's called the ILS critical area boundary, and you are allowed to cross this unless you are told otherwise not to, and that would be indicated here by segment B, and that applies to H right here. This H segment is segment B here. A indicates the runway you're approaching. Again, we just have a taxiway here. E here indicates a taxiway hold. So if there was a crossing taxiway, you would hold short here. This is a runway hold short. You have another runway hold short here. You have a runway crossing hold short. So this is what you'll find when two runways are intersecting each other. You'll have this hold short down here. D down here is a do not enter. E here will show the what taxiway you're initially on, or the taxiway you are on. So if you're on this taxiway, it'll tell you on taxiway alpha. 22 here, blacked out with the yellow letters, shows you the runway you're on. G, again, is that hold short line. H, like we said before, is that ILS, critical area boundary. This is a terminal direction indicator. This is a runway direction indicator, so this tells you how to get to runway 22. This is a taxiway turn indicator or intersection indicator. This tells you, hey, taxiway Bravo's that way. This again is a runway remaining indicator. This tells you how many feet in thousands of feet are remaining on a runway. HS1. Why am I forgetting that one? Give me 2 seconds. I cannot remember. Actually, I believe it's a hotspot. So hotspot 1 indicates that you're entering a area which is typical of runway incursions. Let me just double check that that's correct, because I want to make sure I'm giving you 100% correct information. And N is a non-usable or taxiway ending marker. But let me double check what that HS1 is. I believe it's just a hotspot. And
Are
based
hotspots
off,
only shown on a chart? Do they show them actually on the
I
tarmac?
believe at some airports, I'm actually looking at the FAA's QRH right now, and that's actually not listed as an airport sign. So I'm not actually sure what that is. Um, I'm assuming it's a hotspot. That would make the most sense for taxiways. So they're just telling you, hey, keep your eyes open. N here is showing the end of a taxiway. You typically won't find that at most airports, but it's there just in case a taxiway were to suddenly end. Again, we can see all these signs applied here. So A right here, right down here is telling you, hey, to the right here is taxiway alpha. This black one with yellow text is saying, hey, you're on taxiway alpha. Again, so C here, another example is we have roads, and these are areas which you don't need an ATC clearance to move on. This here, this yellow line is a non-movement to movement area boundary. So over here is your movement area, here's your non-movement area. And that just separates basically where you need to be talking to air traffic control to taxi. Any questions about this?
Yeah, on the other chart that you had, what was C and
The one on the
E?
right here?
Yeah.
So C is the ILS critical area sign. It's a warning sign, and that will coincide with H on this diagram. And you can see that here at indicator B on the left. So indicator B on the left will be accompanied by, again, H and C on this diagram. So, and what was the other one you had a question about?
It was those two.
Oh, okay, yeah. So that's where they apply. Anybody else have questions about this?
Yeah, E and 4. What were those again?
So E here, that is the taxiway.
On the chart.
E. Okay, so E here, this is a taxiway short line. So if they tell you hold short of taxiway alpha, if you're coming here, like exit the runway and hold short of alpha, you would hold short of alpha right here.
And are the dots associated with that as well? The three dots?
I believe the dots are just lights. The 4, what is the 4? I think the 4 is indicating this runway. I'm actually not too sure about that. That might just be something that's there by mistake, but it might be indicating this runway here.
Okay, thanks.
No problem.
And one more quick thing between on the right hand side, E and F. What are the different? I know B would be the taxi. Why is 22? Why would that be the? I thought you said that was the runway.
Yep, so when you're on the runway, you'll see that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay.
Yep. That's just another way to confirm that you're on the right runway. Obviously, the big numbers tell you, but if you're not 100% sure you're taking off the right runway and you see that on the side, that's another way to confirm.
Okay.
All right. This is a big one. If you see yellow X's on the runway, it means the runway's closed. So even if it appears usable, don't land on that runway. If you're in an emergency, obviously different story. You can land on anything. But in general, if you're perfectly fine, don't land on a runway with yellow X's on it. So, airport lighting. At night, the location of the airport can be determined by the presence of a rotating beacon light. And the colors and color combinations that denote the type of airports are as follows. If you see a white and green beacon, so you'll see one white pulse and then one green pulse, that's a lighted land airport. If you see one white pulse and one yellow pulse, that's a lighted water airport. If you see green, yellow, and then white, that's a lighted heliport. If you see green and then white, so you'll see green and then two white flashes, that's a military airport, so I would avoid that. If you see white, green, and amber, that's a hospital or some other emergency location. So again, to follow up on that, double white flash between a land and civilian airport, a civil lighted land airport will show alternating white and green flashes. A military airfield will be identified by dual peaked white flashes between those green flashes. So you'll see green, and then you'll see like a double pulse of white, and that'll identify the military airport. Any questions about that? No? Okay, let's move on. Let's talk about runway lights. So runway edge lights are used to outline the runway at night or during periods of low visibility, right? So at night or an IMC. For the most part, runway edge lights are white and may be high, medium, or low intensity, while taxiways are outlined by blue omnidirectional lights. And when we say omnidirectional, we mean they're 360 degrees. Runway lights are not 360 degrees, they're actually only 180 degrees, because if you were to look at it from the opposite direction, they'd be a different color. So if you were landing, going on this runway from left to right, you'll see white up until the last 2,000 feet where they'll become amber or red. But if you were landing this direction, the first, up until the last 3,000 feet, it'll actually be white. These lights will be reversed based on which way you're landing. The threshold is indicated by green lights. The end is indicated by red lights. The centerline lights are white until the last 1,000 feet where they begin to alternate. The last 2,000 feet where they begin to alternate right and red. And then the last 1,000 feet are just solid red to tell you you're coming to the end of the runway. At the beginning of the runway, you'll have typically 2 flashing lights that are identifying lights to tell you you're approaching a runway. And on taxiways, you'll typically have alternating yellow and green lights to lead you off of the runway. So those are typically the lights you'll see on a runway. If you guys give me 1 second, I'm just going to run away for 1 second. I'm just going to go grab some water really quickly. I will be right back.
Are we still connected?
Yeah, we're still connected.
Okay, I didn't hear him.
Yeah, he just went to go get some water.
Thanks.
By the way, on this short break, guys, I would like to make an audit check, please. Can you reply?
Say that again. I'm sorry.
All right, sorry about that. I am back. All right, so let's talk about the. Actually, before I see anybody had questions, I heard you guys were talking about something.
Oh no, you're good. I think someone asked a question. I think before, but
Oh, okay.
Sorry to interrupt. No, I'm just wondering if everybody's. I mean, I'm listenable. Like my audio is all right. I was just grabbing
Oh
a
yeah.
moment.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Fine. Yeah.
So it's a 5x5, I suppose.
Yep. Yeah. I got you loud and clear.
Great. Thank you, guys. Cheers.
All right. So let's talk about approach lights. Now, the visual approach slope indicator, or VASI, is a lighting system arranged to provide you a vertical guidance kind of basis. And that will give you a 3-degree glide slope when you're perfectly on the VASI, or 3-degree glide to the runway. These lights are visible for 5 miles during the day, and it will provide you obstruction clearance depending on for every airport that you go to, if it has one equipped. So if you're above the glide path, it will actually show 2 bars of white. If you're below the glide path, you're going to see double red. If you see red over white, you're doing all right. That's a good way to remember it. Red over white, you're doing all right for a VASI. White's too high, red's too low, red over white's just all right. That's a good way to remember it. But that's all you need to know about the VASI. Now we're going to talk about PAPI lights, which is a little bit more precise, very similar. It gives you obstruction clearance, but it's a little more precise. So a PAPI has 4 lights, and it'll indicate whether you're too high or too low. If you have 4 white lights, it indicates that you're too high. If you have 1 red light and 3 white lights, you're going to be slightly high. If you have 2 red, 2 white, you're doing all right. 3 red and 1 white, you're low, and 4 red, you're dead. That's how we like to remember it. So 2 red, 2 white, doing all right. 4 red, you're dead. I think I can't remember the one for 4 white. I think it's 4 white. You're flying too high or something like that. But that's the PAPI. Any questions about that?
No, I think the only question I had from a PAPI perspective is that as you come closer to the runway, you always show that you're too low, right? Or no?
Will it show that you're too low?
Yeah. So I guess if you're right about to land, right, but you can still see the PAPI lights,
Right.
you're almost
So
showing.
yes. There is a point where if you get close enough to the runway where the PAPI becomes inaccurate. So typically, use the PAPI to the if you're doing an instrument approach, which you're not. But if you're VFR and you're doing a landing, typically when you get to like maybe 1,000 feet from the runway threshold, it becomes irrelevant. You don't really need it anymore if you're within gliding distance of the runway, because it will become inaccurate.
Thanks.
No problem. All right. So no other questions. We'll move on. So taxiing around the airport on windy days, especially, you might notice that your plane's getting pushed around a little bit. And you have to remember, well, you're in an airplane and wind might take you off the ground. So you have to do some crosswind correction on the ground to compensate for high winds. So taxiing to or from the runway generally will not cause a problem, again, when it's calm wind. But when taxiing in moderate to strong winds, so from like 15 to 30 to 40 knots, if you're flying at 40 knots, well, best of luck to you because you probably won't be able to land the thing. You need to make sure the controls are oriented so that wings and elevators aren't lifted off the ground. So I'm not talking about tailwheel airplanes. This is just for tricycle airplanes. So like a 172, a Piper Cherokee. These are what you do. So I'll give you the acronym of how you remember to do it. So the first way to do it is you always want to put your yoke into the wind. So if you're facing the wind, so if the wind is coming from this direction, you want to put the ailerons into the wind. And the way you do that is if it's to the left of you, turn the yoke or stick to the left. If it's to the right of you, turn the yoke or stick to the right. The way to remember it is if the wind is behind you, to dive away from it, right? So if we're diving away, we're going to push the yoke all the way forward and to the right. If it's coming from the left here, bottom left, we're going to push the yoke forward and to the right. And that'll give us the correct crosswind correction for a tailwind. If it's from the right, if it's a right tailwind, you want to push the nose forward and to the left. So that's what we say when we mean dive away. We're diving away from the wind on the ground. When we're into the wind, you want to turn your yoke into the wind. So if the wind's coming from the left, turn the yoke to the left. If it's coming from the right, turn the yoke to the right. Does that make sense to everybody? Nobody has questions about that? All right, cool. So, chart supplements. We talked about these a little bit before when we were talking about traffic pattern directions. And chart supplements are a publication designed as a pilot's operation manual. They contain all airports in the U.S., seaplane bases, heliports that are open to the public, and they include communication data, navigational facilities like VORs, and certain special notices and procedures for individual airports. So, VATSTAR typically uses Astoria, Kilo Alpha Sierra Tango, as its airport for most of its training. So, let's look at the chart supplement for that. So, this is Astoria's chart supplement, and we can identify that here. So, in the top, we see Astoria Regional, Kilo Alpha Sierra Tango, and it's 3 southwest of the city, the airport. Um, and it gives us the time zone here. So, it's UTC -8, -7 during daylight time. It gives us the airport coordinates, and it gives us a lot of other information. So here, it gives us the field elevation. So the airport's elevation is 14 feet. Now, below all this information, you have, runway information, you have the type of runway lighting. This is showing the length, so it's 5,794 feet long. It's asphalt, as indicated here. This shows the type of approach lighting. We see runway 8 has a VATSIM. The glide slope angle is 3 degrees. And the threshold's displaced 300 feet. So we have a displaced threshold of 300 feet because of a tree. Runway 26 has a Mauser approach lighting system, and the threshold is displaced 713 feet, and that's because of a fence. Now we get all of this great information here. This is the takeoff run available, 5,794 feet. The takeoff distance available. The I can't remember what ASDA stands for. It's just another type of runway distance, and then LDA is landing distance available. So you see that our landing distance is actually less than the takeoff run, and that's because of the runway threshold or the displaced threshold. So you'll have a greater takeoff run than you will landing distance. It indicates the type of services available. So it says we have 100 low lead fuel and Jet A available. It's an uncontrolled airport, so the lighting that's available is activated by pilot controlled lighting. So there's a lot of remarks here. So it says when the airport attended, you have from 1400 Zulu to 0100 Zulu, which actually is for not that long. It goes from noon to looks like 9 o'clock p.m. For fuel outside normal working hours, contact the FBO at this number, and then it gives all these different information. But even more critical is it gives you all the communications frequencies. So if you need to get the weather at this airport, you can dial this number or tune in this frequency. So actually, that's pretty interesting. So what we'll do right now is I'll grab my phone and we'll call the number that's listed here. So if I call 503-861 1371, and what I'll do is I'm going to turn my microphone temporarily up to its max sensitivity so you can hear that. So I'm going to dial, and we'll see if we get the weather at Astoria on this number.
Remarks. Density altitude -400.
Sounds like it.
Of Astoria Airport, Astoria, Oregon. Automated weather observation 2131 Zulu. Wind 310 at 10. Visibility 10.
So that's something cool that I'm sure not a lot of you knew, but yeah, a lot of weather stations will actually have a phone number attached, and it'll be listed in this chart supplement. This CTAF frequency is 122.8. It has a radio communications outlet, which talks to flight service on 122.3. And when you're approaching or departing this airport, you're going to talk to approach on 124.2. That's the approach frequency. For IFR, you have a clearance delivery phone number. It's a Class Echo airport. And then this will show you actually the nearest navigation aid. So there's a low VOR, the Astoria VOR. It looks like it's on field. Yep, so it says at field. And then it gives you all of the unusable segments of the VOR. So these chart supplements have a giant amount of information in kind of just like a single page. And I could tell you right now there's an instrument approach because there's an ILS listed here for runway 26. But yeah, so that's a chart supplement. Anybody have questions about these?
Yeah, I mean, under communications, the RCO that's only used during the operations, right? So when it's attended, then that's when you use RCO, and if it's not, then use CTAF.
So no, RCO has nothing to do with the airport operations. The RCO is a radio communications outlet, and what you use that for is if you want to get like weather information, if you want to pick up your flight plan, if you want to file a VFR flight plan, you would use the RCO. So that really has nothing to do with flying, other than they're not like an air traffic control facility. They're flight service, which is basically a service in the real world that provides weather information, clearance for IFR aircraft, and other useful general pilot information. But no, you always use the CTAF when you're operating at this airport. That's the Common Traffic Advisory Frequency.
So even if it is attended, even if the controller is up there right now, You always use the CTAF.
Well, there is no air traffic control tower. This is an uncontrolled airport. So yes,
Oh, I
you're gonna
clarify.
use the CTAF. Yep.
Oh, okay, okay.
It now, if this were a controlled airport, it would list the tower frequency, the ground frequency, the clearance delivery frequency. Um, but because it has none of that, we know it's an uncontrolled airport.
What does the attended mean again then? So an airport remarks attended?
Yeah, so there's probably like a fixed base operator, which is like fuel services and like
Oh,
bathrooms and stuff like that. That's attended from new 1400 Zulu to 0100 Zulu.
okay, cool. Thanks.
So is this a left-hand traffic airport? I don't see anything for right pattern.
Yep, exactly. So it would say it up here on the runways, and right up on the first line, it would say RGT traffic or RGT TFC if it was right traffic. So all the runways are left traffic, it looks like, based off what I'm reading. Yep, so this is a left traffic airport. All the runways are left traffic. If it were the opposite, it would just say RGT traffic on one of these runways. So yep, you got that right. It is absolutely a left traffic airport.
Again, how do you find that up there? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so on the runways, you see runway 826. It would tell you here on runway 8026 RGT traffic if it was right traffic. Otherwise, if it doesn't say that, it's automatically left traffic.
Okay, okay, perfect. Thanks.
Cool. So let's talk about fitness for flight. We're going to talk a little bit about these oxygen requirements, which aren't super important for you, but well, it's something cool to know. So if you are operating, ignore this bottom part; that's not really necessary. But the top part here is pertaining to hypoxia, because you can become hypoxic at any point above about 14 to 15,000 feet. Anybody can become hypoxic at any altitude. It just depends from person to person. But hypoxia is a state of oxygen deficiency. It impairs functions of the brain and other organs. You might experience headache, drowsiness, dizziness, and euphoria. And eventually, this will lead to you passing out and becoming unconscious. So the regulations in the U.S. Say that if you're operating above 12,500 feet for more than 30 minutes, the pilots have to be on oxygen. And this is in unpressurized airplanes. If you're in a pressurized aircraft, it's a whole different bucket of regulations. Um, if you're above 14,000 feet, instantly the pilot has to be, or the crew members have to be on oxygen. At this point, passengers still don't have to be on oxygen. The FAA says, hey, we don't care about the passengers at this point. They could be passed out for all we care. But as soon as you get above 15,000 feet, everybody in that airplane has to be on oxygen. Passengers, crew members, they have to be on oxygen, or at least has to be available. You can't really force somebody to take the oxygen. Anybody have questions about that? It's pretty straightforward. No? Okay, cool. So let's talk about some other effects that happen to pilots. Hyperventilation is actually when I guess you could say over breathing, because you have a lack of carbon dioxide in the blood. Um, so I don't know if you guys know this, but what actually causes you to breathe and causes that instinct to breathe is carbon dioxide in your blood. So if you breathe too rapidly and vacate all the carbon dioxide from your blood, if you don't remember to breathe, your body's actually not going to tell you to breathe, and you'll actually pass out. Even though, and that sounds kind of counter logical or ironic, because you would think if you have no carbon dioxide in your blood that you wouldn't pass out, but no, you will pass out. And that can be from rapid or extra deep breathing, and a pilot should overcome these symptoms and avoid future occurrences of hyperventilation by talking aloud, breathing into a bag, or slowing the breathing rate. And what that'll do is that'll give your body time to process all the oxygen and convert it back to carbon dioxide. And again, symptoms of hyperventilation are like a lightheaded feeling, euphoria, um, things like that. I'm kind of hyperventilating a little bit right now as I talk and take a lot of deep breaths. Um, Carbon monoxide poisoning. That's a thing that nobody likes. You hear about, unfortunately, some people take their own lives. They'll park themselves in their closed garage and they'll turn their cars on, and that's carbon monoxide poisoning right there. Carbon monoxide is a colorless, odorless, and tasteless gas. It's in exhaust fumes. And symptoms of that include headache, drowsiness, or dizziness. and large accumulations of that chemical in the human body result in a loss of muscular power, eventually leading to unconsciousness and death. Susceptibility to this poisoning increases as there's less air available at higher altitudes. And the way you would avoid this, if it does happen, is you want to obviously close all the heater vents in the airplane. You want to open any windows that you may have available. So, we talked about a couple weeks ago, or last week. Actually, we canceled last week. 2 weeks ago, we talked about flight instruments and how we should always trust our flight instruments. So, various complex motions, forces, and visual scenes encountered in flight may result in misleading information being sent to your brain. And that happens because your body gets its sensory information from canals in your tube, your vestibular system, canals in your ear. There's tubes filled with fluid, and we call this your vestibular system, and that's how your body determines which way it's oriented. And when you're in an airplane, it's very unnatural. Humans are not meant to be in the air, so your body doesn't know how to react at some points. You can be completely upside down at some point, and if you don't have the right visual cues, you'd never know. Your body might think you're perfectly upright. And that's why people get motion sickness in airplanes. They get dizzy, they throw up, because your body is really unsure and confused of what's going on. So, because of this, you can get spatially disoriented and not really be sure of your surroundings. Um, and that's kind of just like an illusion that you'll experience, an aeromedical factor. And the best way to overcome that feeling of dizziness is to just focus on your instruments. And that's going back to the last lesson we had. Focusing on those flight instruments guarantees that you're going to be operating safely. And you should really trust those instruments rather than relying on what your body's telling you, because your body, 9 times out of 10, is going to be telling you the wrong thing. I guarantee it. I guarantee that in the real world. Trust me, it's a thing. Not so much for Flight Simulator, but in the real world, definitely a thing. Any questions about these? No? All right, cool. So, collision avoidance. One of the biggest things that causes collisions is atmospheric haze. So this reduces the ability to see traffic or terrain during flight, making all features appear to be farther away than they actually are. And before you know it, you might hit an airplane or hit a building or the ground, even worse. Um, Scanning the sky for other aircraft is a key factor in collision avoidance. So during the day, you should scan the windshield left to right and then right to left in 10-degree sectors. So kind of look at one portion of the windshield, wait a second, another portion, wait a second, another portion, wait a second, and just basically look at each sector for traffic. At night, you want to just scan left to right on the windshield slowly. Don't really focus on the 10-degree things. Kind of just scan left to right, because the way your eyes work at night, it just is a better scanning method. Another thing, this is going to be important for P1 when you have to do your maneuvers. You should visually scan the entire area for collision avoidance. Make sure there's no, towers, terrain, or especially other aircraft. Any aircraft that you see in the sky that, doesn't appear to be moving is on a collision course with you. If you look at an airplane at the window and you're like, hey, that doesn't look like it's moving, it means you're about to hit it. So it's likely to be on a collision course with you. And if it shows no relative movement, again, very close, that it could be on a collision course with you. If it shows no lateral nor vertical motion, but increases inside, make sure you take evasive action. And that's why it's important to scan before you begin a maneuver. Any questions about this? No? All right, wonderful. Aircraft lighting. So this is another way that aircraft lights are useful. These aircraft lights will actually help you avoid other aircraft at night. When an aircraft is being operated from sunset to sunrise, you have to have your navigation lights on, which are these green, red, and white lights, as well as an anti-collision light. So that could be strobe lights, that could be beacons. Those are the primary types. But these lights actually are critical in telling us which way aircraft are moving at night. So you have forward-facing red and green lights and rear-facing white lights. So at night, if you see just green and red, you can tell that the aircraft is coming directly towards you because you're able to see both of the forward-facing lights. At night, if you see a green or red, you really won't even be able to see the green and red. But if you see just white lights, it means the aircraft's moving away from you. If you see um, a green light and a white light, or even just a green light, you can tell that the aircraft's moving from the left to the right of you because that green light's on the right wing. So, if that makes any sense, the right wing is going to be closer to you, which means that the plane's moving from left to right. If you see just a red light and possibly even a white light, that red light's on the left wing or the port wing, and it's moving from right to left. If you see 3 white lights, it means it's moving away from you. Does that kind of make sense of how we determine, which way an aircraft's moving at night? If you look at this diagram on the right, it kind of makes a little more sense. But if you have any questions, I'll try to explain it a little better. No? All right, cool. So that's all I have for you today. If you have any questions about what we went over today or anything that you can think of, we'll try to go over it. If not, I'll see you guys next week.
One question about lights. Is it customary to leave your landing light on under 10,000 feet?
Uh, so in smaller airplanes, no. In airliners, yes. Smaller airplanes, there's no law that says you have to have it on. I turn mine off. Um, Typically, I'll turn it on when I'm approaching an airport. You can leave it on. With LEDs nowadays, it's pretty customary. A lot of people like to leave the landing light on. Um, but on older airplanes, if you leave the light on, you're going to burn it out because they're not LEDs, they're incandescent bulbs. But again, that's kind of just personal preference. You can decide on whether you'd like to do that or not. Anybody else? I'm happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, if I may, I bring you back to those poppy lights.
The PPL Lights? Yeah, let me grab the slide. I don't remember which exactly one it is. Here we go. Yep.
Right, yes, those are kind of two types of which I counted through the sim. Those linear ones and those which in parallel. I mean, why they're the way they are. I mean, which is the main difference?
You mean these, but between this and the PPL? The VASI versus the
Correct.
PPL, is that what you mean? Yeah, so the
Correct.
VASI is just less precise. So the reason you find the reason why not everybody has the PPL is the cost involved in installing. The VASI is a lot cheaper to install for small, hillbilly airports, but it does pretty much the same thing. It guarantees that obstacle clearance. Um, the PPL, you'll find it more, more wealthy airports, and it's a lot more precise. For pilots, they can adjust their vertical guidance and their glide slope more accurately. But the cost is mainly the primary reason that you don't find PPLs at every airport. It's just a difference in precision. That's all.
Oh, right, cool. And just yeah, just wondering because this is approximately plus minus 3 degree glide
Yep.
path. No. So,
Yep.
right. Okay, cool. Thanks a lot.
No problem.
So I did have a question about coming into an airport too. So we're landing. So if you come in like with an RNAV approach,
Hmm.
I mean, can that? I guess some airports have RNAV approaches. So you can just come in through the RNAV, or do you have to follow the coming into the pattern, if you want to say.
Okay, so this just as a warning, this is P2 stuff, guys. I won't go too deep into it, but so that depends, Earl. Um, that depends on the type of RNAV approach. If it's an RNAV approach that has circling minimums or is aligned with a runway, um, if it's aligned with a runway, no, you'll just go straight into the runway.
Okay.
If it's a circling RNAV approach, you're going to go down to the minimums for that approach, and then what you'll do is you'll circle to land at one of those runways by flying a pattern at a lower altitude. But
But
and
that
that
pattern.
that
Okay.
pattern altitude will be the minimums for the approach.
So usually you have a hold pattern. You have a hold circle, if you want to say, and then you come in you come in then land, right?
Exactly, right? So
Okay. Okay.
the circling minimums will be listed on the chart. Um, and there's a distance that you need to be within or be able to see the airport depending on the type of airplane you're flying.
Okay. But if you but if you come in, so let's say, because I've done this before, like you'll fly, you'll get flight following and all that,
Hmm.
and then you're going to go to a uncontrolled airport,
Hmm.
and you're saying you're going to come in through the R, and they hand you off and they say, oh, you're VFR now. Can you still come in through the RNAV, or do you have to? Is that only for instrument only?
No, so to actually do the RNAV, you have to be cleared for the approach on an IFR flight plan. And if
Okay.
you're doing an approach at an uncontrolled airport, you're still going to be on an active IFR flight plan, and you'll shoot the approach. You'll keep the squawk code, but once you get on the ground, you have to call back in the real world, at least. I'm not sure about VATSIM, but on VATSIM, I'm sure they'll just give you like approach services down to the ground. But in real life, you'll have to actually call approach on your cell phone, or sometimes there's a frequency on the ground, and you'll have to cancel your flight plan once you're on the ground.
Okay. Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
If I can ask about the navigation lights.
Sure.
If you find yourself in the situation you are on collision course with another airplane, like for example, it's coming towards you.
Yep.
Is there a given way to avoid collision?
Yes. So the law, or at least in the U.S., both pilots are supposed to deviate course to the right. So if you see somebody coming straight on, go to the right, because if he's following the law, he should know the same thing. Because once he sees you, he's going to make a course deviation to the right.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
So we always go towards the green in that case, right?
No. If
No.
you see a plane coming towards you, you're actually going to be making a right. So it doesn't matter if you see a red and a green. Just make a turn to the right.
Okay. Okay.
Back to the case of the uncontrolled airport.
Sure.
Say a pilot is coming in with flight following and gets a clearance to come in, but I'm flying VFR. I'm assuming I'm responsible for keeping clear and watching for other aircraft, but I guess potentially I could screw him up by getting in his way and not know that he's even coming in there. So is that okay? If I'm not aware of his instrument approach and I'm just
Right.
waiting
Yeah.
for something to happen.
So he's actually so when he's landing at an airport and he's on an IFR flight plan, you can be VFR. It's right. So we're talking about an uncontrolled airport. So he's been handed off to your CTAF frequency. So the approach control will say, frequency change approved. Cancel IFR on the ground. He'll go over to your frequency and he'll announce that he's on the approach, or he's supposed to. Um, but again, if it's VFR, if it's visual flight rules, or if it's visual meteorological conditions outside, like he can see the airport, he is responsible for maintaining collision avoidance. But at the same time, so are you. So he should coordinate. Um, in that case, separation from traffic. So you and him both have that responsibility of separating from each other at that point.
Okay, so he's going to get handed over to a Unicom
Right.
frequency, and I should hear him make a call.
Exactly.
That makes sense.
Yep. Any other questions, guys? Well, this one was quick. I didn't think we were going to be done that fast.
Always. Well, I do have one more. So the the pattern is what's the flight level normally, or is it shown in the chart?
Okay, so the pattern is, let me go back to that. So a pattern for a non-turbojet airplane is always 1,000 feet AGL, above ground level. So Astoria, if we look at the chart supplement, is 14 feet, not 1,014 feet. The pattern is the field elevation is 14 feet. So what we do is we know that the airport's 14 MSL, so we're going to add 1,000 feet above ground level, right? Because ground level is at 14 feet. So 14 plus 1,000 is 1,014 feet. And what we do to get the pattern altitude is we round to the nearest 100. So 1,014 is 1,000 feet. So the pattern altitude will be at 1,000 on your altimeter. So 1,000 MSL will be the pattern altitude.
Okay.
But let's say an airport is at 67 feet. So 1,000 plus 67 is 1,067 MSL. So we're just going to round up to 1,100 and call it that.
Awesome, thanks.
No problem. Any other questions?
Is pattern altitude the same for all types of airplanes, or is it different depending upon whether it be prop or jet or whatever?
Yeah, so jet aircraft typically will fly about 500 feet higher. So jets are supposed to fly at 1,500 AGL, not 1,000, because they're faster, they're less maneuverable, so they'll fly a little bit higher.
Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. All right. If nobody else has any other questions, we'll wrap up for tonight. You have a question, Mark? I see you're.
Yeah, back on use of landing lights or leaving them on while you're flying below 10,000. I presume that's a daytime only answer that you gave.
No, even at night, you're at least legally, you're not required. That below 10,000 thing, that is for airlines, and that's not even a regulation. I'm pretty sure. I believe that's just like their standard operating procedure. Um, but for our kind of flying, legally speaking, you actually don't have to have your landing light on. Yes, it's a good idea to do it when you're landing and taking off, but even then, you're still not required to even use it unless you're operating for hire.
Okay, but I guess my question was more, you were talking about leaving it on while you're flying.
Mm-hmm.
Would you want to be doing that at night so it would lead to potential confusion between the red green with the white lights in between?
Yeah, exactly, right? So that's again personal preference. There's no law on it. I turn mine off for that reason. But
Okay,
some people do leave it on. Again, that's again personal preference.
okay, thank you.
No problem.
And I think you answered my question. Is there a problem with leaving it on? So the answer is no.
Legally, no. Yeah, there's no
Personal,
problem
okay.
for it. It's just again
Okay.
personal preference. All right. All right, guys. I will hope to see you all next week at. Actually, next week it's going to be 2200 Zulu because we go back to regular time, I believe. So same time, 5 p.m. EST.
All right.
All right, guys. I'll see you
Sounds great
all
to me.
next
Thank you.
week. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thank you.